evening. For the Press Corps, I'm Geoffrey Jennings. We interrupt this broadcast to bring you live news from the front. Taking you now to Press Corps Colonial correspondent Lucas Parker, live from the Deadlands. Lucas, where are you now, if you can give us an approximate location in that region?
I am currently just south of Abandoned Ward along Sunhaven Gateway to Cemetery Junction. Here up with the Colonial forces. It is currently snowing in the south side of Deadlands. Not sure the level of the snowstorm. You'd have to check with the weather team for that, but it is quite a bit nippy here. There's definitely some snow on the ground. Does make it a little bit hard to see, but it's not to the extent to where everyone's blind.
I'm hearing some gunfire there, a little more than gunfire, but it looks like some big shots from big guns being exchanged.
Oh yeah, Colonials and Wardens both have tank lines up here. At some point, someone had built quite a few walls. Looks like they were almost honeycombed, not to the extent of, you'd see a long time ago, but there are definitely walls there for intervening cover. Wardens currently have 3 HTDs on the line, along with a Tier 2 Ironhide, it looks like, heavily stripped armor, kind of hard to tell there. As far as the Colonials go, mostly just mass production tanks. There's a Spaffa here or there mixed in, a few stolen tanks. Notably, there is a stolen mortar tank that is in play. But as for the Colonials, it is the per usual, making good use of that mass production tank. Wardens can't field anything like it.
How much space is there to maneuver in this here in the 919th day of War 95? I imagine this is a very well-developed front, considering it is the Deadlands.
Yeah, from what I can tell, it looks like the front has been stagnated from here for quite a while. Quite a few artillery shell craters, foxholes mixed in here and there, nothing but no man's land. So I'm sure you could hear that that light tank got up there and got a little bit too aggressive. He's backing off now. He looks like he'll be fine. The walls do hinder the tank's movement quite a bit. On top of the trenches, there is also a lake immediately to the left of the road, and by immediately I mean 3 meters to the left of the road. If you're familiar with the location, you'll know which one I'm talking about. So the tanks really only have one avenue of advance, and that is the road. Should they go any further into the off-road area, they'll get halted by craters or walls where they won't have a clear line of sight or could get ambushed by infantry.
Abandoned Ward is no longer a viable location for any kind of staging point. It was hit by a rocket, the 3rd rocket in the war some time ago. So what is there left from your strategic assessment of the region? What is there left to fight over here, if not the crown jewel of the Deadlands?
Well, it seems to me that for the most part, everyone's just going around the Abandoned Ward. Keep in mind, it is an island. Its strategic importance is there, having the vehicle factory, the assembly station. They're all very, very helpful for an advancing army, should they control it and keep it alive. But even without it, you can still bring logistics into the region. It just slows down the snowballing of whichever side has Abandoned Ward. Now, from what I can tell, it seems that for the most part, Wardens are trying to hold on to their foothold in the region. The Colonials are trying to close out the region and advance. Instead of using Abandoned Ward as their primary staging point, Colonials opting for other towns in the region. I won't disclose which exact ones for operation security reasons, but I do not think it actually gives them that much of a hindrance to not be able to operate out of Abandoned Ward.
Meanwhile, you've got the Wardens operating either out of an undisclosed base, but they do hold the towns of Liberation Point, the town of Liberation Point, as well as the relic base at Suns Hollow in the southwest. So the Colonials at least have a majority of the region, and as you said, looks like they do have the momentum. But I guess the question is, who will be able to close out here in this slogfest of just tattered, from what it sounds like, pockmarked, cratered, and destroyed terrain?
I will admit it looks almost like the surface of the moon here. If it wasn't for the snow, I mean, I honestly, with it snowing, it's hard to tell whether or not I actually am on the moon. Again, as said before, Wardens have 3 HTDs in play. From what I can tell, and keep in mind it is hard to see because of the snow, their armor is not in very good shape. Looks like they've been out here for quite some time, whereas most of the Colonial tanks are fresh. Again, from what I can see, 3 HTDs with the Warden Ironhide, which I haven't seen come back up yet, but I would assume it is still in play, against what the Colonial tank line currently has as 2 Falchions and 1 Spatha, staring them down in a staring contest. And honestly, I've got quite a bit of experience with tank combat, and I couldn't tell you who could win here. At this point, it mostly just comes down to player skill and making good maneuvers.
A little spice of luck as well. Tell me, see if we can get a couple of interviews as well from some of the people on the front line and maybe even in the tanks themselves. But in the meantime, while you set up to do that, just a reminder that the PressCorps Rocket Watch is at level 2 exchange, and there are 2 remaining rockets still yet to be launched here in War 95, officially the longest war in the history of the Foxhole Wars combined. So this is certainly a standout war that we are in, but still at the same time a relative quiet before the big storm that is most likely going to be the next war. But we'll get into that hopefully down the line. Lucas, any chance that you've been able to get in contact with anyone?
Yeah, we gotta put them down.
I might have to get back to you here in a minute. If you go to a music break, I should have one by the end.
Oh, you're not that anymore.
Understood. That's perfectly fine. Actually, in fact, while we do that, I'm going to be while we have the sounds of battle playing in the background, we do have some updates in terms of casualty reports. 3.8 million combined dead here in War 95 so far. It's a dead heat between the Wardens and the Colonials. Approximately close to almost 6,000 dead per hour so far in the current state of things. That number has gone well past 6,000 in recent memory. But so far, the largest amount of deaths coming from Callahan's Passage, actually. Hal's Pass being the site of the death. Even though it is Colonial controlled thus far, it is certainly home to a lot, had been home to a lot of the opening salvos of this conflict. And we have seen that almost nearly half a million of all deaths coming from Callahan's Passage. Once it does reach, it looks like if but not when it reaches that 500,000 mark, then that will probably be about, I'm guessing, 15% of all deaths in the war coming from that one region alone. That's how deadly it is. But certainly plenty of other fierce fighting in Umbral Wildwoods, Speaking Woods, Reaching Trail, up and down this east-west war, and of course the Deadlands, where Lucas is stationed right now. I'm not sure if any major changes in the front. I think it is pretty much just two columns of tanks staring each other down in bated breath. Is that correct, Lucas?
Oh, shit.
Yes, and I would assume they'll get far more active. Oh! Artillery is actually just opened up here in the Deadlands. Unsure if they're speculative shots or if preparation for a larger barrage. But I'm going to take some shelter here real quick because that was artillery fire that just landed near my location.
B-bats, let's go. That's what we're talking about.
Who would you say fired those shots? Maybe not a regiment or anything, but just Colonial or Warden?
I would assume they are Warden.
They're gonna actually be mats.
Warden shots.
We need B-mats over here. Come on.
Yeah, it sounded a lot closer towards their end of the front line, or our end of the front line than theirs. Though I'm still on the lookout again. Like I said, it is hard to see where exactly these artillery shells are landing with the conditions, the weather conditions here.
Straight across the street from here. It's in a trench.
Other guys on there.
Again, not sure if they're just speculative shots or for preparation for a larger bombardment. Oh. Just witnessed an artillery shell land behind Warden Armor.
Machine gun coming through.
Still unable to tell whether it's concerted effort by the Colonials or the Wardens at this point. It is taking a fair amount of time in between each shot. And remember, within a snowstorm, the wind conditions are rapidly changing. Doing any kind of artillery in these weather conditions is going to be rough for whoever's directing it.
How often would you say the wind changes? How often?
I mean, honestly, it's constant. you're going to end up making adjustments every 10, 15 seconds to make a consistent artillery fire.
Multiple wind
should-
direction
it could-
changes in a minute,
Yes.
within a minute.
Yes, multiple. Probably 2 or 3. Sometimes it can calm down a little bit. You can go a minute in between wind changes, but it is for the most part very rapid wind changing conditions.
How many colonials
see
and
if I
wardens
can
would
get
you
an
say are
interview here.
operating in this area?
Does seem to be probably on the larger side for the conditions we've seen in this war so far. It's nothing like what we have seen in the past, though I'd say the Colonials are probably operating anywhere from 50 to 60 infantrymen, keeping these tanks covered in the trenches. I would assume the Wardens are fielding a similar amount,
But there's gunfire.
but again, it's very, very hard to see where their lines are in the snowstorm. Limited visibility means that even during the day, I can't get a good picture of what their lines are like, apart from the infantry, or not infantry, armor, my bad.
You know, considering you're talking about the sight lines, do you know what approximate time it is there in the Deadlands?
It did in fact just break morning, about 5 a.m. in the Deadlands. Let me check my watch. 6:08.
That's about right. 0600 is about when day breaks, and we do get full visibility back. Although I don't know what the
And with the daylight visibility, it does seem Warden Armor is actually starting to make some movement. They've closed about 30 meters down the road. You can hear Colonial Armor calling for retreat.
They are 60 meters.
His HTDs have lined themselves up like sardines along this road. Keep in mind, there isn't very much room for movement. One HTD takes a hit from a Bane. It is retreating. I'm unsure if the rest will. Nope, the other 2 HTDs are holding the line. And again, they are immediately flanked by that Ironhide on the left side. Second HTD takes a penetrating hit from the Bane, fired by Colonial infantrymen. It only retreated about 5 meters. They seem intent to hold this line firmly. Ricochet against the HTD from Colonial Armor.
Inside the
Main fires again, also a ricochet. Although the HTDs are slowly backing up with that light tank on their flank.
I guess.
I think they're just taking a little bit too much pressure to be comfortable up there. Does appear that the HTD that was hit originally, the first HTD that took a penetrating hit from the Bane, lost its main gun,
12.7.
and that's why it retreated all the way back.
HTD.
It also
First
heavy
sorry,
tank destroyer. Yes,
Yeah,
heavy tank
heavy
destroyer
tank destroyer.
is.
What are the attributes there? I can infer, but just for those who may not be into the tanking side of things.
Heavy tank destroyer is the Warden's premier anti-tank weapon. It is a slow, very heavily armored vehicle. It has a casemate mounted with a surprisingly wide arc, but still no more than 90 degrees. I think it's more like 45. High velocity 68 millimeter gun. This gun is absolutely devastating to tanks. Not so much against structures. And again, this is their heavy tank destroyer. I would say, just to give you an idea of how well armored it is, 40 millimeter Colonial Armament is really, really going to struggle to penetrate the front of it at range. You're looking at, 10-ish, maybe 12 shots to actually get a penetrating hit if you get unlucky. Artillery continues to fire. Looks like it's firing on the Warden lines for the most part. Intermittent, as it is. Oh, that's actually Warden artillery firing. Correction. That one actually just landed right behind the cover the Colonials were using. I hope those guys are okay. Landing a little close to me as well. Seems like they've actually started to range in. And with the artillery pressure on, HTDs are advancing again, this time just 2, flanked by the light tank on their left. Ricochet on the HTD from the Bane. Colonial Armor, maintaining sparring distance. I don't think they want to get too close to those things. Penetrating hit on the Ironhide, the Warden Light Tank. Ironhide is a little bit more armored than the regular Warden Light Tank, but does struggle. One of the HTDs has been tracked. Both of them have been tracked. They're both in full retreat. Colonial Armor is making their play against it. That one HTD is about to have to back up a hill. I don't think they can go back any further. No, they can't. They're stuck. Colonial Armor making as much of a play as they can against that heavy tank destroyer, but they're having a hard time penetrating its armor. Third heavy tank destroyer has come in to engage and is attempting to body block the one that's stuck. Colonial Falchion is disabled. Still struggling to penetrate the armor of those heavy tank destroyers. I don't know if they'll make it out of it. Nope. There goes Colonial Falchion. First heavy tank destroyer, the one that is tracked and stuck, it is still there. Though with the intervening Warden Armor, I do not think they'll be able to get to it. Spoth is moving up to take some speculative shots at the light tank. I don't think that one actually connected. As you can hear around me, anti-tank rifles are firing at the heavy tank destroyers. The second one that is tracked has now repaired itself and is in the action. And both of the walls that the Colonials were using as cover have now been destroyed. So the tanks have a lot more freedom to move around. And it sounds like artillery. Yep, artillery is landing on both sides now. Seems like the Warden artillery presence is much stronger at the moment. A Colonial Falchion has actually managed to flank entirely behind the Warden armor line. Every single HTD is turning around at the moment. One of them is disabled, side on to the main line. That Falchion isn't going to be alive for much longer, but if the Colonials can capitalize on this, they might be able to take an HTD down. Colonial Frontline Armor nowhere to be seen, though. So that HTD remains disabled. Pretty daring play by that Falchion crew. Had the front line actually been there to capitalize on it, that could have been devastating for Warden Armor. For now, though, it seems they're
changes right now in the past few minutes. Tell me, how many losses have each side sustained in terms of their armor?
Someone pick me up.
Seems like the Colonials have lost 2 Falchions for a trade of nothing. They did manage to disable 2 individual tank destroyers separately, but couldn't actually close out the kills. Although, to be fair, damaging them does damage their armor and make them easier to take out in the long run. And Colonial Falchions are much easier to replace than a heavy tank destroyer is. Colonial Spatha has returned to play, holding steady at the end of the road. Again, tank match is turning mostly into a staring contest. I'm unsure what's going on with the Warden light tank. Does not have a driver in it. Oh, there it goes. Started moving again. May have been decrewed temporarily, but it was a tad overextended. They've retreated now. And again, the infantry fighting rages on. Considering the snowstorm, it seems both teams' infantry is for the most part sticking to cover. Keep in mind, when it's snowing, your ability to move outside of cover is severely limited. It makes you an easy target. So, as is, the Wardens and Colonials are fighting cover to cover. Right now, to paint you a picture right here, on both sides of the road, there's a set of trenches, set of earthworks. Colonials hold a small trench on the left side of the road and a much larger T-shaped trench on the right. In between both trench lines is completely pockmarked with craters and foxholes, for which most are filled with Wardens at the moment, and they are taking and exchanging shots between the Colonials from those foxholes. Behind those foxholes is a set of heavily damaged trenches. Some of them are caved in, some of them are completely destroyed, and the Wardens seem to be trying to use those as best they can, but they don't really give that much cover, not much more than a foxhole will. Warden Armor moving back up. Only one Colonial tank to hold them back, that tank being a Spatha.
Yeah, we don't allow people named Chuck in the hole. Get out.
Give me a
Dang,
second.
that
I'll
was
grab some.
rude.
We don't allow people maybe chucking the hole if they're not helping repairing or healing. Looks like
Warden Armor is engaging and destroying anti-tank pillboxes.
If anybody sees gas
That
on the
was
shoulder, I might need it.
one of the few things, apart from infantry anti-tank weaponry, that have been holding them back. So we'll see if they start making more aggressive plays here.
Excellent
Again, the wardens
reporting
have-
thus far, Lucas. Just want to say that this is day 920. You're listening to PressCorps Colonial correspondent Lucas Parker reporting live from the Deadlands. Hope you're staying warm out there.
I'm moving from trench to trench as best I can. It does give me some shelter from the cold, but just gotta make do. Again, Warden's having 3 HTDs on their line and a light tank. That was a Bane that you just heard fired at a heavy tank destroyer. It did penetrate its armor, and they are backing off slowly. Only one of the heavy tank destroyers, looks to be one of them with more damaged armor than the rest, and the light tank are on the line at the moment. And Colonials only have that Spatha. I will note that Spatha looks like it came fresh off the factory. So he does have that going for him. And another falchion is moved up to replace the one they lost earlier. So things are starting to even out a little bit.
Isn't it?
Lose one, 2 more take their place. Yeah, and that the falchion as a utility tank, it performs excellently. Can fill the role of a light tank, albeit a light tank may be a little more nimble. But their biggest boon is the fact that they are really, really easy to make and distribute compared to Colonial Armor. It is difficult to produce and field a heavy tank destroyer,
Did you
which
mean Warden Armor? It compared to Warden Armor?
yes, Warden Armor. My bad. But as I was saying, heavy tank destroyer is difficult to produce and field. You have to fuel it, and as slow as it is, it takes it a long time to get to a front line. Falchions are made in larger batches compared to Warden Armor and are made for cheap. So, you could make 2-3 falchions for the cost of an HTD and get them to front line far easier. So that is something to take into account when moving, or when comparing armored losses between the factions. 1 or 2 falchions to an HTD is roughly equivalent, even though it may sound like the Colonials are losing heavier than the Wardens are. And something interesting that I just saw happen, the Wardens appear to be bussing in combatants directly behind their friendly armor.
I got binos. I'll spot for you.
Unsure what just caused that penetrating hit on the heavy tank destroyer. It is retreating. Must have been infantry anti-tank that I couldn't see.
Now you said this fighting is taking place south of Abandoned Ward?
Yes, directly south of Abandoned Ward along Cemetery Junction.
Where is he? Where's he coming?
I wonder if that bus, how many it's dropping off. I'm pretty sure you can't confirm that from your position.
Yeah, I can't confirm. I can't see it through the snow. I just know that bus is coming in and dropping off infantry. At least I would assume.
Stick along the right side.
Keep moving.
I would assume dropping off infantry. It may just be there for show, which, if it is, that is an interesting information warfare tactic that I've never seen before. Warden Armor making a play again. Heavy tank destroyer bouncing infantry AT. They do appear to have traffic jammed themselves a little bit. Ricochets all around as the tanks spar with each other.
Did we get naded? Am I bleeding again?
You're gonna die. Get used to it.
For those of you who don't know, like I said, the Falchion is the Colonial mass production tank. They can make very many of them. But the Spatha is actually a more specialized variant of the Falchion, which has a higher powered, high velocity 40mm gun in the turret instead of the standard short barrel 40mm. Hits a little bit harder than the Falchion will, but it is a fair amount harder to make a Spatha.
Wow. Just light a fire.
Seems like the Colonials allowed one of their medium tanks to freeze, almost right on the front line. It's not so far up that it's in immediate danger, but
Bus is frozen.
It is still frozen there nonetheless.
Now, in order to keep tanks warm, someone would have to keep the engine running. Is that correct?
That is correct. If you keep the engine running, the tank will stay warm and eventually thaw itself. If you do allow it to freeze, oh, here comes the bus again. From what I can assume, yeah, I'd venture to guess that bus is dropping off infantry. Which, if so, that is really neat to see. But as we were saying, you either keep the engine running, which will slowly thaw itself, or if you allow it to freeze, in order to get it running again, you have to thaw it. As I'm sure you can hear the infantry around me trying to organize that.
Alright, guys, let's keep.
Alright, here we go.
There are, interestingly enough, a few concrete trenches further back towards the Warden lines. These are much further back than the trenches they're currently using for cover. It looks like the Colonials had advanced through here before and took out some form of bunker complex, and those are the remnants.
In the chat.
Two of them are capped, and one of them is caved in. It would be interesting to see how infantry would fight through that, using those capped trenches as pockets to hide in.
Thank you.
Medic.
Do tanks consume their fuel while they're completely idle? Engine running, but no movement.
No, actually, they don't. They don't. While running in a snowstorm, not much will change so long as you don't get out of your tank and allow it to freeze. There's a window. Warden artillery nailing Colonial artillery nailing Warden armor.
Appreciate it.
I don't know if that actually knocked out anyone nearby, but it did land right next to that heavy tank destroyer that was repairing. Light tank up and sparring with, I think, a defensive pillbox with an anti-tank rifle in it. Looks like the HGD is about to drive up and do the same thing. Moves forward. He's holding just shy of it. Again, Wardens on either side of the road, in craters just in front of that heavy tank destroyer, keeping it safe from enemy infantry. Light tank moving up again. Attempted to spar with the pillbox. Shot landed just short.
Don't forget.
Alright,
All three HCDs are now in play again. Although the road is too narrow, they are having to come in more as a conga line.
Here comes the tanks, 3 of them.
That will make it harder for them to retreat if one of them gets tracked.
Quick overview, how many Warden armor assets are in play?
There are 3 heavy tank destroyers and 1 up-armored light tank, the Devitt Ironhide.
And how many did the Colonials have?
From what I can tell, apart from the Spatha and the 2 falchions, which another falchion has moved up to replace it, they are keeping distance as best they can from those heavy tank destroyers. Apart from that, I haven't seen anything. Looks like the infantry is giving the heavy tank destroyers some trouble. They aren't. Oh, there goes that pillbox. Again, the AT rifle pillboxes are about the only thing keeping those tanks from advancing, and as each one goes down, they creep closer and closer.
There's infantry at the graveyard. They pushed
Colonial infantry using their infantry anti-tank weapons.
Come on, medic. Take me out.
Heavy tank destroyers firing their shells into the trench, trying to take out that infantry. It's not something you see done very often. Maybe not the most efficient use of a shell, but it does work.
The tanks are really good tanks, so we can get in.
Bus dropping off more infantry behind them.
Come on, boys.
And again, another thing to note, the Devitt Ironhide does have snow tracks. It is much more mobile in the snow compared to any Colonial counterpart.
We can open it up.
It's a unique thing that you don't really see come into play very often, but off-road, this tank is, honestly, in a snowstorm, very scary in the maneuverability department. Compared to a regular Warden light tank, it is slower normally, because it does have extra armor, but in a snowstorm, the snow slows down the tank so much that those snow shovels on the tracks really help.
We lost. This area is
There's
gone.
3 tanks right in front of you.
Yeah.
Tanks closing to within 30 meters of the Colonial bunker core. And one of the falchions has lost its gun. Forgive me, I'm having to move back a little bit to stay safe, but one of the falchions has lost its main gun,
Yo, shut the fuck up.
has yet to actually move.
Just took this fucking tank off the road, bro.
Danger close,
Come on,
boys.
dude.
Look, man, I'm helping.
Artillery continues to fire intermittently.
Let's go.
You're helping and you're talking.
I'll be honest, this doesn't look too great for the Colonials in their current position. Walls in front of the bunker core have been knocked out. Falchion taking hits.
Get the fuck inside.
Moving forward.
Looks like command and control, if there ever was any, is breaking down for the collies
Oh,
at
yeah.
this bunker
It's-
base.
There seems to be a large amount of shock and panic at the moment. Tanks struggling to maneuver, get around the infantry, and back out. That falchion did take 2 penetrating hits, I assume, from heavy tank destroyers, and if it did, it's not in good shape. Second Spath is moving up, hopefully to spar, I would assume.
Let's go, let's go, let's go.
Hopefully just to keep those heavy tank destroyers at bay and keep them from putting more pressure on the core than already is. Because if keep in mind, the Colonials, if they lose this bunker core, they're going to be set back good 50, 100 meters. Who knows where the next spawn point is that they can utilize to mount an effective defense. Colonial artillery firing on the Warden line. Roughly where the tanks are. They've backed up to a full reset, lined themselves up along some friendly trenches and bunkers. Good 100 meters past the Colonial front line. As tanks tend to do, they'll back out to repair to a safe position and come back in and put some pressure on, utilizing that armor.
Let's see if there's a lull in the fighting, at least right now, just for the moment. If you can take a moment just to see how things are going for the Colonials, to get any interviews with anyone on the front line, how they're going to get out of this pickle.
If it doesn't show up, we lose this front line.
What makes you say that?
My calculator.
I don't
My frontline calculator.
Hey, RGB man, I'm
Do not hang out around.
I'm Lucas Parker for the PressCorps. Did you mind telling me how has the fighting conditions been here so far within the snow?
Dude, it's been shit, dude. Been here for like the last 2.5 hours. It's just been like a slog. They had us. Do you know the? Oh God, you know the hill, Sun Haven Gateway?
Yes, I'm familiar with that one. For our viewers who aren't aware, south of Abandoned Ward, there is a stone bridge. Immediately south of that stone bridge, there is a large cliff. Gives maybe the attackers or defenders, depending on position, a very, very large advantage in holding the line.
Yeah, like honestly, if it weren't for that cliff, like this front line would have collapsed. Like,
So you said about 2 hours ago, you're saying you were pushed back to there and holding on that cliff?
about 2 hours ago, we finally pushed out from the cliff. We'd been there. I woke up this morning and at like 11 this morning, and we were still fighting on that cliff. And I went away for a bit and came back about 05, and we had finally started like. We were still holding, but then we finally were able to like counterattack. I don't know what it was, but we like smashed the Warden Armor that was here. Like 4 or 5 cruiser tanks got destroyed, and all of a sudden we were able to push everything that was going on.
All right. And if you don't mind me asking, as far as the conditions here, the weather conditions have not been the best. It is currently snowing, and it is not light snowing. It is fairly heavy snowing here. What challenges, if any, have those been giving to your ability to advance?
A lot of it's just really been like trying not, like, you're stuck out in the open too long, you're gonna freeze to death, right? Like, our advances are slow. They're defense by defense, like you're fighting inch for inch, right? Like, and you're not just fighting the Wardens, you're fighting the elements, right? You're fighting for these trenches so that you can stay warm long enough not to die.
So holding onto the trenches is a lot more important than it usually is, you're saying?
I mean, in this case, yeah, I would argue, like, we've really been fighting these defenses, inch by inch, because really, like, it's the only way that our guys are staying alive.
Yeah. Well, here's hoping you can stay warm out there for a little longer. I know it's quite chilly out here.
Yeah, and well, just fucking 3 days before it was downpouring. Like, so just imagine all that fucking water froze over,
Oh, yes. Another thing that's interesting to note here, should this snowstorm get any worse, like I said earlier, there's a lake immediately to the left of the road here where the combat is taking place. If it gets much worse, there's a potential for that lake to freeze over, if I'm not mistaken. That could open up several new avenues for combat.
Yeah, I know with a lot of the command, right, like, there's some of the engineer corps has been discussing that, right, like, do we booby trap the lake if the wardens try to come across, right, like, what do we do when that lake freezes over? Because I'll be honest, it's not a matter of when, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right, like, it's Deadlands. Nothing lives here.
Yeah, and I will say it doesn't seem like the snowstorm's showing any propensity to lighten up anytime soon. So it's something we'll have to keep our eye on.
Absolutely.
Do you have any plans at the moment to deal with the current Warden Armor, or are you just holding as best you can?
Honestly, we're holding best we can. It's been a trade-off. Like, we'll knock out a couple of their tanks, and they'll bring up new armor. We'll make advances. We pushed. Where the road starts to fork right outside of Liberation? We got up to that point, and then the Warden Armor came in and pushed us back.
So you were almost to the town, like right up to the point where you could see the garrison houses.
We were really close. Yeah, we could see the garrison houses. They had that hilltop advantage. We were whipping the infantry, and then the armor showed up, and it busted up our tanks, which is what halted our advance.
Damn.
I think we lost 2 Bardishes up on that hill.
Oof. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. If the front line has been moving back and forth over this area for a good while. Yeah, if the front line's been moving back and forth in this area for a good while, then it makes sense as to why it's so torn up and pockmarked. I have been seeing artillery fire intermittently, and for the most part, it doesn't seem like you can build effective defenses here with how torn up the ground is.
Yeah, sorry, what was that one word?
From what I can tell, it doesn't seem like you can build effective defenses here with how torn up the ground is. And that makes sense considering how far you've gone back and forth over this terrain. Have your structures been unstable ground at all?
It's just been a hellscape, man, like, the fucking shell craters, like, I guess to the point I made earlier, right, like, earlier in the day, it was fighting over trenches. Now I think in some cases, like, we're fighting over shell craters, right? Like,
all right. Well, I will let you get back to the combat. You stay safe out there.
of course. Godspeed, Pressman.
Godspeed.
Quick update, during that interview, the frontline conditions have changed. From what I can tell, the Colonials have pushed up a fair amount. Warden Armor is now at the head of the hill. They've moved back probably a good 40-ish meters. 40, maybe 30. Colonials have brought up a stolen utility vehicle. It is the Warden utility vehicle with a machine gun on it. They're currently using it to suppress Warden infantry. And the Colonial tanks have advanced up to about right where the water meets the road, right where there's that little 2 or 3 meter gap. However, it's just 2 Colonial tanks up there, both falchions. They aren't having any issues with space at the moment.
So just look at that.
For those who are just joining us, it is day 920 here in the 95th conflict of the Foxhole War. You're listening to PressCorps Colonial correspondent Lucas Parker live from a fierce armor back and forth in the Deadlands.
Colonial artillery continuing to fire on the position of the Warden Armor. However intermittent it may be, it's still putting pressure on them, no doubt.
Oh, fucking says for that thing.
Seems like the Colonials are making concerted effort to take and hold these trenches that the Wardens were using earlier.
Yep, we are.
Again, I'd like to remind our viewers, these trenches are not in the best condition. They are partially collapsed, and for the most part aren't making particularly great cover. I think what's giving the Colonials such an advantage here is that machine gun LUV they're using to suppress and pin down infantry, because its mobility in the snow is much higher than theirs. Having the ability to move in the snow is important. HTD holding the line up against a rock wall right outside the edge of the town. We're actually starting to get close enough now that I can see at least one of the garrison houses has been leveled by artillery fire. As artillery continues to land on the Warden position.
We want to stay with these guys. Everybody. The other tank.
Warden's now stuck with only a few very small trenches to hold the line with. And if you didn't hear our interview earlier, it does seem to be that the vast majority of this combat is trench for trench. Again, with the snow mobility impairments and with the weather conditions, if you're not in a trench, you're not going to be having a fun time on that front line. If you stay out for too long, you might even freeze to death. So it makes a lot of sense as to why there would be fighting from trench to trench. We've just hit nightfall now at 1800 hours. Visibility is starting to decrease again.
Fucking whispering thing, yeah.
Tanks continue to spar. As of now, it seems to be just the one falchion against two HTDs. I'm surprised they're not putting pressure on that. Although keep in mind, the HTDs are not in very good condition. Their armor is very worn. Which, while their armor is their best feature, when you take that armor out of the equation, they're... As scary as that gun is, they become a lot easier to take down. You need to play a lot more cautiously.
You know, Lucas, listening into all of this, the choke points, the narrow choke points along that road that you described, it's going to make it almost feels like it nullifies much of the effect of the HTDs in terms of, well, no, they still have that frontal armor that's still effective. They do have the piercing gun as well, but even then, 2 at a time, maybe 3 if they're lucky, can still blunt it. So we'll see, because it looks like zooming out just at the wider map overall, that's going to be one of the narrow choke points here in this East-West war along the River Mersey. And that makes sense that it would be in such a natural choke point. Certainly if the fight were in Eastern Lockmore or the Heartlands, or maybe up north in the moors, then certainly we'd see a much wider lightning strike zoom through much of the open plains. But no, here we are at Cemetery Junction, where it's not a lot of room to maneuver around these already pockmarked sectors.
I will say, I think the Wardens probably do have a bit more of an advantage here with their heavy tank destroyers in this narrow avenue, because they do have that frontal armor, and even stripped, that frontal armor is still something that they can rely on to a certain degree. And although they may not be the most durable tanks, that frontal armor, being able to present it and know that it won't be flanked is very, very useful. As the front opens up, though, the Colonial Armor is going to have a lot more room to maneuver. Once they get into the city, the heavy tank destroyer that the Wardens have does not turn very well. Warden Armor is going to struggle there. I think if the Colonials can make their way up to that city, where it starts to open up a little bit, their armor will have a lot easier time dealing with these tank destroyers. And again, with all the intervening cover within these fields, as narrow as a choke point is for the HTDs to move, and though they do have that heavy frontal armor, and I do think they have the advantage, they have to present their sides to infantry cover that they may not be able to see the infantry in, where the infantry can jump up and hit them with anti-tank weapons in the side. So that is something to be aware of, especially with the evolving conditions of this loose front line and the limited visibility of the snow.
I do wonder if a breakthrough really were on the table. Maybe the Wardens don't necessarily want it right now, but if a breakthrough were to be on the table, not too far, and this is public information, this can be easily seen on the map or on foxholestats.com, but there is a cluster of 6 storm cannons at West March and neighboring Lockmore. I'm actually not quite sure on my ranges, but is that enough to reach your current position?
From what I can tell, yeah. I think those are well within range. As far as I'm aware, the wind conditions don't affect them anywhere near as much as it would affect artillery in region. The problem is whether or not the wardens actually have the facilities to get them involved. And keep in mind, if those storm cannons had been aimed anywhere else prior, it is going to take a long amount of time to turn them onto target and then get them to the point where they can fire. Storm cannons are not necessarily quick reaction. They are very powerful and very scary. And if the wardens did want a breakthrough and opened up with those storm cannons, there's not much the Colonials could do about it. They're just going to get pushed back, and they're going to have to retreat. It's too dangerous to stay in that area.
The next Colonial cluster of guns over is probably going to be at Spit Rocks in neighboring northeast Marvin Hollow. Along there, again, this is all public information. But that's going to be, if either side wanted to even employ it, if they even thought it was worth it, scarring this landscape even more. But for now, it looks like the only super weapon really hitting this region is going to be that rocket that hit Abandoned Ward some time ago. The third rocket here in War 95. Just a reminder, the PressCorps Rocket Watch is on level 2 exchange, and there are only 2 rockets left, if I'm not mistaken. No, excuse me, 3 rockets that can be fired. 1 in Reaching Trail, which has not been claimed, although it seems Reaching Trail is in a majority Colonial control. Additionally, the Fingers and Endless Shore. Not sure if they're primed, but it is public information on foxholestats.com that the Colonials do have control of these rocket sites, and they do have them at least built up. So it seems that the Wardens have spent all that they can spend in terms of the rocket weapon, and we will see how the Colonials close out this phase. This might be the first time. I always forget if this is the first or second time, but this might be the first time we have reached depleted, where no rockets are left to fire. Lucas, I'm not sure if you know offhand, but I believe we have never reached a point where no rockets, or rather where the rockets are depleted.
I don't know offhand if that's the case. I do know that if it isn't the first, it is definitely one of the first few. And on top of that, this is definitely the first war I've seen where rockets have been dropped not on primary logistics towns in the back to end a war, but on a few critical towns in the midline. What's interesting here is that usually rockets are used to force an enemy into submission to end a war, so that you don't have to push all the way through. And the rockets that have been spent so far have been spent on towns that would have had to have been captured to win the war in the first place. So, it didn't really give neither side an advantage like they usually do. So what's going to be interesting to see is this war, both teams are going to have to push a lot further than they usually would to close the war out. It means for a longer conflict, more drawn out.
Some may even say it would last forever, but we know that may not necessarily happen. 920 days and counting, the longest war in the history of the Foxhole War so far, and is not close to ending anytime soon. Even if all 3 rockets were to be used on important points, victory points, then that would require 24 towns need to be captured. So far, the Colonials and Wardens only have 16 each. So we are not, we may even reach 1,000 days at this point.
I will say, with you bringing up the mention of those storm cannons, just a hex over, I am noticing an unusually large amount of no man's land. It could have been the case that those storm cannons have opened up on this position before. Can't confirm that, although it is definitely a possibility, and if that's the case, that would explain as to why they're having such a hard time pushing through it, because again, artillery tears up the ground. The more torn up the ground is, the less durable the structures you build are going to be on that. If you're not building your trenches and your pillboxes into firm ground, they're not going to have as much to anchor to.
And they come. Our range for our cannon is 40 meters, right? So specific vehicles in this game have different ranges, right?
Right, I got you.
Seems to be a little bit of field training going on to my left.
Anything 100 meters?
To the left.
I need to know about it within 100 meters, okay?
Visibility.
Colonial's actually starting to push up towards the town again.
Joe?
I don't actually see the Warden Armor at the moment. Seems like they've either partially retreated or fully retreated. Again, let me paint you a little bit of picture here. This is Liberation Point that the Colonials are pushing into. The road into Liberation Point, like I said earlier, through Cemetery Junction, there's a lake immediately on the left that severely limits mobility. There are trees that evolve into woods on the right side of the road that will limit the mobility of armor and visibility of infantry. Now, those trees are a little bit further up the road compared to the lake, and then from about the distance that the trees are up the road to the lake, there is a sheer cliff right along the road that turns out. So you either have an obstruction on the left side or the right side. There is no in between. It's a really, really narrow choke point right here. But right after you get past that, it opens up into a plaza with a lot of road and a lot of open ground. Wardens have extended the walls a little bit along the road towards the right side where it opens up into the town. I honestly think that might give the Colonials a little bit more cover to work with, should they be able to push up in there. None of the garrison houses that I can see so far are built. I don't know if they were earlier and have been destroyed, or if they have not been built up yet. I don't know how long the Wardens have held this town. But should the Colonials be able to push up into that plaza, I think it'll give them a real opportunity for a breakthrough here. What it's looking at, without that Warden Armor in play, Colonial Armor is starting to make some moves. It's allowing our Colonial Infantry to push up and keep support with them and hold that ground that the tanks are taking. Another pillbox goes down in one shot. This ground is pretty well torn up. That is a falchion on the road, taking care of defenses for the infantry. No threat at all from Warden anti-tank, it seems. There is a single heavy tank destroyer moving down the road up into that choke point along the rock wall. And again, there's, like I said earlier, there is a sheer cliff, a sheer rock wall cliff along the left side of the road. Immediately behind that rock wall cliff, there is a short rock wall that flanks the road on the right side and follows around. It's a very, very tight area to be maneuvering through with tanks. And it does seem that there's an anti-tank mine right in the center of the road in front of that heavy tank destroyer. So I do not see him advancing anytime soon. And as much as that limits the leeway of the Colonial Armor, if they notice that anti-tank mine as well, you will be in good position to put pressure on without having to worry about that tank destroyer pushing them.
Back when I heard the bone saw. That is a bone saw from the war.
There's one of them anti-tank ones up in front of us. I'm telling
Interesting to see the falchion putting pressure on at night as well, with even further limited visibility. You don't usually see tanks making plays at night.
I switched to the wrong thing.
Second heavy tank destroyer moving up, though currently the road really only has room for one. We'll see how they do this.
I do wonder if
Both of them still have stripped armor as well.
I do wonder if you can talk with one of the Colonial infantrymen on the front line there and see how they plan on getting up that hill and breaking through that overlook point that the Wardens do have.
We'll see if I can find someone who isn't occupied. Moving up a little bit here into these trenches.
We're being gassed yet again.
Love the smell of chlorine.
Wow. So beautiful. Got some SMGs.
That shit, why are there so many bags in there? Jesus.
Pin May, I'm Lucas Parker with the PressCorps. How do you guys plan on getting around these obstructions up ahead? As is,
Shot that against a brick wall repeatedly. That's the idea, okay?
That's a good idea.
I mean, I suppose so. If that's how you plan on taking it down, I don't see how that wouldn't work. But specifically, you are currently live. You're currently live for the PressCorps.
I'm currently live at the PressCorps. Hi, Mom. How you doing?
There's a rocket in here. Anti-tank rocket.
Also, alcohol. Alcohol will help massively. I'm currently drinking energy drinks. Not alcohol. Don't
Water
get it.
supply.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your time. Seems the Colonials just intend to brute force through this. I don't see much reason why they shouldn't. Because currently, as much as that restrains the tanks, the Colonials have superior infantry. Whereas the Wardens are fielding their superior armor. The obstructions that the tanks are dealing with are more cover and protection for the infantry in the long run.
Well, Lucas, I'm very curious to know how this plays out, given enough time, but we don't quite have that time for the air right now. Lucas, thank you so much for your reporting. Excellent reporting here and from the Deadlands outside, south of Abandoned Ward, the destroyed, scorched Abandoned Ward here in the Deadlands. But Lucas, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I will stay around for further reports in the future. Bid you good night.
Landmines are not your friend.
The PressCorps is a non-profit creative collective of artists, reporters, and players from the MMO video game Foxhole by Siege Camp. Our mission is to engross our audience in and amplify the stories of this unique war ecosystem. The PressCorps was founded in early 2018 by former PlanetSide 2 Radio Free Araxis host, Captain in Arms. It is a separate community entity and is in no way representative of Siege Camp. For more information, visit the PressCorps Discord through the link below.